Okay. The time is Armistice Day 1940, and that went on in history as one of the worst blizzards we had ever had. And the way it started out, on the night before, the weather was really nice. It was just like shirt sleeve weather. I don't think we were outside in the evening, and it was, I don't think we even wore a jacket. It was so nice out, mild, November 11th. And in those days they called it Armistice Day. Now it's called Veterans Day, It's Armistice Day. Armistice Day then was when World War I was over, when they signed an armistice that with the Germans that they weren't going to fight. It didn't really mean that they surrendered or anything. All it was an agreement they're going to stop fighting. So anyway, that's why it was called Armistice Day. So anyway, the night before the storm, we were outside and we were lived on the farm, and we were out there catching chickens and putting them in the chicken house, because at that time of the year, you could expect some bad weather and they like to get the chickens inside. And as long as the weather was nice, the chickens wouldn't go in that chicken house at night. They would roost in the trees. They'd fly up in the trees and roost. And so there'd be some trees to be full of chickens. Usually we had around 100 chickens. And that was my mother's department. She was taking care of the chickens, and they were quite valuable because they furnished enough eggs to sell, to trade for groceries. So that the chickens paid for much of our grocery bill, and they bring the eggs into the grocery store and trade for groceries. So then we thought we'd better get those chickens in, because we didn't take a chance of losing some of our income. But we had time getting them because they were roosted up pretty high in the trees, and we had to get like a long cane pole that they use for fishing, and they put a little wire hook on the end, and they'd reach up there and hook onto the legs and pull them down and catch them and put them in the chicken house. Well, it was getting pretty late, and we were having a little time getting a hold of all these chickens. So it was dark out and getting dark, and so we decided, being the weather is so nice, we can probably wait and catch till the next day and catch some. So we got some of them in, and some we didn't. So some were still left out. And the next morning, and I remember waking up in the next morning, when we were probably about the time we'd get ready to go to school, and I heard the wind blowing started to roar up there, because we slept in a bedroom upstairs in the farmhouse that hadn't been finished. It was just 2x4 studdings and the bare rafters in the ceiling, so it's open way up in the ceiling with just the rafters. And then there'd be boards top of that, and then there'd be shingles. And then the same with the walls. There were boards, and then there was siding. No insulation, no plastered on it or nothing. It was just the studdings showed. And when the wind blew, you could hear it, so it just, there wasn't any insulation. You could really hear the wind, and you could really hear the rain. And in the morning at church, the wind was just hard, really just roaring, in the house upstairs in the farmhouse, where we had our bedroom. We got up and looked out the window, and it looked like pure white. Couldn't see anything except snow. couldn't see the other buildings on the farm. It was just snowing and blowing so hard it was just never seen anything like that before. Well, of course, the chickens were outside yet, so I lost a lot of them. There's no way you could get them in a storm. They probably blew out of the trees and ended up covered over with snow. So we lost many chickens. But we had the cattle, the cows, and the horses were in the barn. We kept them inside at night, so they're okay. And the hogs had their shed out. They had a shed out in the hog yard that they could go into, so it didn't bother them. So the barn was warm, so there was not any problem with anything freezing to death. And the hogs, in the fall, they built kind of like set up poles, and they put fencing around the poles and over the top of it. And then when we threshed the grain in the fall, we threshed the straw over the top of that, and it formed a complete, looked like a big straw stack, but there was a big room under it. And it was the best hog shed you could get because it was so warm in there because the walls were thick with straw and over the top and everything. So they just had an entrance where the hogs could go in. And it was really nice and warm in there, so they were. But there were some farmers that had stock outside, and they lost much of the stock. If they were caught outside in that blizzard, that actually said the animals would choke. The snow was so thick, and the wind was so hard they couldn't even breathe. So there's many farmers lost their some of their livestock, but we didn't lose any livestock. They were all okay, but it was just the chickens. And that stormed all day, and it was just dangerous to go outside because you couldn't even see the barn. But they had to get out and take care of the stuff, milk the cows and feed them and feed the hogs. So you had to be real careful to get to the barn. And I don't think the kids were allowed outside the door even. And but we had a pretty good grove around the house on the northwest side mostly, so that cut down on some of the wind. So we didn't get quite as much rain. It got huge drifts in the yard. And but it was much worse for people closer to the Minneapolis metro area because it was during duck season. And the Mississippi River Valley down there was a very good, popular duck hunting area because there was backwaters and sloughs and shallow, and the ducks used to come in there by the mallards in the fall. And so some of them got up early, see the storm hadn't hit there yet. They didn't know anything about it. But it was so nice and warm there yet that they didn't dress too well, and they used duck boats, and they'd go out to these islands. And then later on in the morning, the storm hit so fast and so hard that someone couldn't make it back to the mainland. They were stuck out on some of these islands, so they lost many lives. The hunters lost their lives out there in the snow because they weren't dressed for it, and they just plain froze to death in the storm because it went there. So if they'd had communications then like we have now, they would have known in that area that storm was coming. That could have saved an awful lot of people. So then it lasted all that day, it just blowing and storming, just terrible. And it came from the northwest and was moving toward the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, in that area. So then when the storm let up, then they had to start looking for a lot of these hunters that never showed up again. And there was a lot of them that were out there were still alive. They made it through, but they were in such bad shape. So they They're trying to get out there and rescue him and get him back, and they were one of the airport operators